Oi, oi, it's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast episode 138. Coming at you on Friday. We're doing a small, informal one at the moment, because I'm sort of half-watching one at the same time. Joe Natawut just stopped Sasha Moisa, or whatever his name is, in the one kickboxing Grand Prix, so probably while I'm on air, I'll be watching either Yodson Klai or Giorgio Petrosian fight. If you're a Patreon boy, I did a preview of this one event, which you can get to by going to the Patreon or just by going to the Fight Primer. It was a fun one to talk about. You got Shinya Aoki versus Christian Lee later in the night. You got Giorgio Petrosian and Yodson Klai both in action. Obviously, we were all dreaming of Yodson Klai versus Giorgio Petrosian, but they've got to get through 2 matches each in the tournaments to get there. So expect something to go wrong. Sod's Law, or as I put it in the article, Yod's Law. So, yeah, we won't talk too much about that. I mean, I just watched Gary Tonnen heel hook his man. That was pretty good. They had 2 of Gary Tonnen's previous opponents swinging like bums earlier in the night, gassing out in the first round while hitting each other in the head. I mean, it's all right. It's just like, it's so fake. One, the fights are good when they have, the people they get are good, but then they've got a fake Pride lady who is there for people who are like rabid Pride fans, but are also too stupid to find out whether it's actually the real Pride lady. Len Hart. They had Len Hart for a while, and then they decided to sack her and get someone who sounds like her, which apparently really hurt her feelings, which is really sad. But then they got Mitch Chilson and Michael Chiavello on the commentary, and then they got Misha Tate coming on commentary, and if you heard her on Quintet 3, she was fucking awful. She was calling, had no idea what was actually going on. It's pretty clear she doesn't follow the fight game or the grappling game anymore, out as a retired fighter. So she comes in and Gordon Ryan is on Uriah Faber's team, the Team Alpha Male team, as a guest. Gordon Ryan, hot off the heels of huge ADCC performance, probably the best by an American ever. And she's going, this Jordan Ryan, he's pretty good. I quite like him. Probably shouldn't pull guard though. And then going he'll have a good guillotine because he's one of Uriah Faber's students. Just saying stupid shit over and over again. And in this fight that I was just watching, they had this lad come out from Evolve. Evolve is Chatri's team, so you get a lot of favours if you work for or if you're an Evolve fighter, you represent Evolve. Basically, you wear Evolve t-shirts. It doesn't actually mean you train at Evolve. So Misha is listed as an Evolve fighter. This Brazilian lad is listed as an Evolve fighter. So Michael Chiavello goes, oh, and of course you train together at Evolve. And she has to be like, yeah, yes, he's very good. Just going, I know that you don't train together at Evolve. I know you have no idea who this lad is. Just surreal. But that's one in a nutshell. Just a series of big lies with some great fights in between. But what we got going on in the news? Some weird stuff happened since the last time we spoke. Frankie Edgar was booked for a title shot against Max Holloway, which of course is a big slap in the face for Alexander Volkanovski, who just beat Aldo. And of course you've got Ortega and Magomed Sharipov fighting for, what we assumed would be like number 1 contendership, but very strange, nonetheless. So Frankie Edgar has inactivitied himself into a title shot. I mean, it's an interesting fight, but it is just sort of weird when you've got those other guys there. Volkanovski, in turn, after beating Aldo, I saw someone call it a questionable decision on my timeline, and I was like, what the fuck were you watching? He ended up in hospital with a blood infection. I believe he's still there, or might have just been cleared to travel, but he was there for a while. Pretty scary stuff. Cain Velasquez is going to be doing some work with AAA, which is pro wrestling down in Mexico in the summer, presumably getting ready for that hop over to WWE because he keeps saying that he's going to do that. But then if you consider the schedule of a pro wrestler, it is grueling compared to what Cain Velasquez does now. Justin Willis was removed from the rankings for an unknown reason, which is only really news because that's what they kind of do when you've been caught by USADA now that they're not announcing the USADA violations. Which is hilarious because you'll remember that in his last fight he fought Mark Hunt and beat Hunt. So expect a top quality copy pasta coming out of this very soon. Song Yadong is booked for Alejandro Perez, which is a nice fight. I think they already booked that once and it fell through. And then Neil Magny was caught for taking, hold on, dihydroxy LGD 4033, which is apparently a selective androgen receptor modulator, so very much used for muscle growth, bodybuilding shit. Going to be tricky to argue that was a tainted supplement, but I expect him to. Well, if he really needs to, he can just do what Tim Sylvia did back in the day, because he's a gangly guy. He can just be like, I wanted abs, or I wanted muscles. Because Joe Rogan used to repeat that when Tim Sylvia got caught for roiding. And that was hard back in the day to get caught on a commission test. He goes, well, I spoke to Tim, and he just said, I wanted abs. Oh yeah, I'm sure that's the reason that Tim took those roids. Anyway, we've got some fights coming up this weekend. We'll do a quick preview of them. I mean, there's the one event going on as we're talking now. KSW, which, we don't really need to cover. Occasionally I cover KSW, but Scott Ascom's in the main event. Yeah, quick check what's going on one. Fucking adverts. They had a huge promo package for Christian Lee versus Shinya Aoki. By the end of it, I was just like, I want to be a doctor so hard. So what's going on this card? It's taking place in Rochester, New York, the Holy Land. That young man spoke to God. He spoke to God. And there's some interesting people on it. I mean, you got Aspen Ladd versus Sijara Eubanks. Sijara Eubanks, obviously more known for what she says than what she does. 4-2, missed weight in one of her most important fights. Had a fight with Roxanne Modafferi in what was that, November, won by decision. Beat Laura Murphy by decision. Not the premier fighter in terms of excitement, but still a bit of a tough fight for Valentina Shevchenko, if you get my drift. If you haven't listened to the post McGregor Habib episode, I did a cold open where we did the John Malkovich opening, but instead we did it about Sijara Eubanks and Valentina Shevchenko. It was so much fun. Probably the best thing I've done on this podcast. Anyway, what have we got on here that looks good? Julio Ars versus... Zach Cummings is back. Patrick Cummings, his brother, is fighting Ed Herman. I don't think I've ever seen Patrick Cummings win a fight, to be honest. Michele Pereira versus Danny Roberts. Danny Roberts is always good fun. Didn't he fight on that British card the other week? Oh, that was the fight with Claudio Silva, where it was a questionable armbar stoppage by Kevin Sataki. Where it was a really good back and forth fight. I'm going to have to watch that again, actually. That was a lot of fun. So Danny Roberts is back versus Michele Pereira, who's 22-9, but Tapology has him listed as the number one heavyweight in Japan. So I don't know what's going on there. Charles Jourdain versus Dead Green, fair enough. Sijara Eubanks is fighting Aspen Ladd. Aspen Ladd is the hotness at women's bantamweight. We're all super stoked on her. She's 7-0, unbeaten, nice enough lass. And what did she do last? Oh, she fought Tonya Evinger and just smashed Tonya Evinger even quicker than Cyborg did, I believe. Which is always a good claim to fame. Beat Lena Landsberg by ground and pound in round 2, of course, as well. I forgot she already has a win over Sijara Eubanks. That's bizarre. That was back in Invicta. But both her UFC fights have been good. She was booked to fight Jessica Rai and Leslie Smith and Holly Holm. All of those fights were cancelled. I believe the Holly Holm fight, the most recent one, was cancelled because they just needed to put Holly Holm in that main event co-main event against Amanda Nunes. But, Aspen Ladd, very rare to have a good quality finisher in the women's divisions. And, a lot of women not finishing by ground and pound. I don't know why. Maybe it's because, I suppose, if you're talking about, upper body strength, which is the main difference between men and women, proportionally, that would probably have more effect on grounded punching and striking than any other facet of the striking game, or, the fighting game. So maybe that's it. But she batters lasses, which is always enjoyable to watch. What else we got? Austin Hubbard versus Davy Ramos. I love Davy Ramos because basically he came out of nowhere at ADCC a few years ago and won the finals by jumping over Lucas Lepre? I think it was Lucas Lepre's guard and armbarring him. You know, like when Genki Sudo turned up to the LA Abu Dhabi trials in something like 2004 or something. So it wasn't even that big at the time. And he just leapt over people's guards and face hugged them with the triangle. He was just doing triangles from everywhere because he could. It was kind of like that, but against one of the best black belts in the world, possibly ever. So yeah, Davy Ramos, legit grappler, as demonstrated by the fact that his last 3 wins were by rear naked choke. The Chris Grutzmacher, Nick Hine, and John Gunther fell short against Sergio Moraes, who just fought Wally Alves last night, or the other night rather. And then his only other loss was against Dave Rickles, the caveman in Bellator. So, yeah, he's sort of like an up-and-comer, but that Sergio Moraes loss sort of derailed any momentum that he had, because, if he'd won that fight, he'd be like 6-0 now, and we'd be talking about him in proper title contention. However, he is a lightweight, and, you could win 8 fights at lightweight back-to-back in the UFC and not even be close. I mean, I was talking about Christian Lee versus Shinya Aoki in my Patreon piece, plug again, but they are listed as, they're not technically it's at welterweight because of the one hydration thing, but they're listed as like the number 101 lightweight in the world versus the number 193rd lightweight in the world or something like that. And I was going, well, that tells you how good the division is, because I'm super fucking stoked about this fight, and they're not even in the top 100 lightweights in the world. That division is fire. Austin Hubbard, meanwhile, is the number 2 lightweight in Iowa, which means that his UFC... That's a rough UFC debut. Jump into it with Davy Ramos. Wait, Charles Oliveira versus Nick Lentz. I feel like these guys have already fought like 4 times. Well, was that really back in 2015 that he submitted him? And then he fought Max Holloway and got his neck torn open, whatever. And they fought in 2011. Okay, so this is the third meeting between the two of them. I think I remember being a bit annoyed about this matchup the other day, because I felt like Nick Lentz has done about half of what Charles Oliveira has done recently. So he beat Gray Maynard, who is just a ghost at this point, and then Scott Holtzman by decision in February. Meanwhile, Charles Oliveira beat Clay Guida, Christos Giagos by rear naked choke, Jim Miller by rear naked, and he manhandled Jim Miller. And then he anaconda David Tamer in a really back and forth fight with some cheating. I feel like he should be in a much better position than fighting Nick Lentz for a 3rd time. And I'm not seeing a cancelled fight on either man's record here, so I don't know what's going on with this matchup, but there are enough lightweights in the world that you could match them against someone else. Then you got Vicente Luque returning after that fantastic fight with Brian Barberena, which really, Luke had looked very, very strong up until that point, and by having a guy who just sort of weathered his shots for the early going and then started pouring it on, Luke looked a lot more limited. There was a lot more just sort of straight covering up. Barberena was forcing him into cover-ups with volume and then backhanding him and coming over the top with folding elbows and things, hitting the body well. And Luke did pull it off. It was like a last-second KO. Yeah, 4:54 of the 3rd round, so really last few seconds. But yeah, I mean, I like Luke a lot. Really nice counter-punching. Great straight, decent jab. Just a big banger who knows when to throw. But again, that sort of... he's had that sort of question now with Barberena being like, well, I'm not knocked out. How are you feeling now, mate? Which is where, that's where everyone always falls apart. If you've been smoking everyone for a few fights. In fact, for the most of his career, he's been smoking everyone. Except the decision against Leon Edwards in 2017. Leon Edwards, God, he's just beaten some really good guys. I love me some Leon Edwards. So Vicente Luque is fighting Derek Krantz, who's coming in off the LFA. Don't really know an awful lot about him, I'm afraid, but one to keep an eye on anyway. Seems a strange step from Barberena, who's sort of like a solid journeyman in the UFC, to debutant. And he's 24-10, so it's not like he's a young upstart who's just coming up through the rankings at rapid speed. Meighan Anderson's fighting Felicia Spencer. This is so strange. I've seen so much hype about Meighan Anderson this week, and I just don't understand it. She is not great. I mean, it's great that she's I want to say a big lass, but normally when you say a big lass, you mean like a fat lass. But I mean, it's great that she's tall and actually can be a proper featherweight. And someone was saying, why didn't she could go up to lightweight and fight Kayla Harrison, which is exciting. But she lost to Holly Holm and looked bad in that fight. Holly Holm puts on a wrestling clinic on you. You got some problems. Before that, she fought Charmaine Tweet in a fight where, I mean, she got the head kick, TKO, KO, whatever, but she looked bad in it. I mean, I wrote a whole article about how she looked in her career through Invicta. But then she fought Kat Zingano, and really not a lot happened before she kicked at Zingano, and her toes scraped across Zingano's eye. And, fair enough, that is I suppose it's fairly a head kick stoppage, but, I mean, they stopped it for eye injury and she won. But no, I didn't see anything in that fight where I was like, oh my god, now it's time to be hype about Meighan Anderson. I mean, she's got a podcast, she's a nice lass, she's funny, clever, articulate, but people are pretending that there's stuff there that isn't. But then she's fighting, supposedly, I mean, Tapology's got her opponent as number 4 in the world. Oh, no, number 6. Meighan's number 4, which I'm guessing means Nunes, Cyborg, Julia Budd in that order. Unless you're Tip to the Junk, in which case it's Julia Budd, Nunes, Cyborg. So Felicia Spencer's off Invicta. Like any promising female talent, it's just like, go to Invicta and then we'll buy you up straight from there. Anyway, co-main event is the return of Shoeface. Shoeface beat Tim Boetsch in 2018, and Tim Boetsch was coming off a long layoff in that one. Looked interesting enough. I mean, I've seen a few of Shoeface's fights, but again, it's been a little while since we've seen him. When was that? Was that April 2018? He fought Tim Boetsch, and then he's had 3 bookings: 1 versus Derek Brunson, 2 versus Elias Theodorou. He's pulled out every time. Oh no, Brunson pulled out with the eye injury the first time. He's had a lot of setbacks and cancellations, and you know he made it so that we got that co-main event between Elias and Derek Brunson. So starting on a bad foot already in this fight. But Shoeface, if you didn't know, he won I think it was the Brazilian season 3 of The Ultimate Fighter or something like that at heavyweight. So a big middleweight is what we're talking about here. You might also know him for tapping out Gary Tonin on short notice. Obviously, Gary Tonin, much smaller than Shoeface, but Buchecha took on Gary Tonin at short notice at ADCC and had way more trouble. But that Tim Boetsch fight was just, you know, flappy hands, weird jabs, heads up in the air, kind of like an old school Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy. Got clattered over the head with the right hand at one point, got the clinch, took him down, you know, moved to the back, standard and fair. You're not seeing much from Shoeface that is saying, like, this guy's striking it's coming along. It's more going to be the case that he's going to work out he can bang, and he'll be a little bit more like, you know, probably like Jacare, have some interesting punches, but not really put them together in a coherent game. And he's fighting Ian Heinisch, who's just coming off that win off, Mutante. Cesar Pereira came in off the Contender Series with a nice knockout. Yeah, I mean, it seems like that probably should be sort of a tune-up for Shoeface. Side note, if you search Shoeface on Fight Pass, you get Misha Tate as the recommendation. You actually have to learn Antonio Carlos Jr.'s name and type that in to get Antonio Carlos Jr. Very peculiar, but funny nonetheless. So let's talk about this main event, which is the one that I actually know something about. You know, most of these fighters are not, with the exception of like Charles Oliveira and Nick Lentz, a lot of these guys not really on my radar too much. This is not a tip-top quality card, in my humble opinion. Rafael dos Anjos versus Kevin Lee is a great fight. It's a 170, which is peculiar. I firmly believe that Rafael dos Anjos should come down again to lightweight. I mean, if he can make the cut, he was a killer there, and he got caught by Eddie Alvarez, and then he had a rough fight versus Tony Ferguson, and then he went up. And really, I think he still gives a lot of the top guys trouble. You know, Donald Cerrone is now in title contention, so that division is just anyone can come up against anyone, and you'll be shocked at who can beat who. Like Kevin Lee looked unstoppable against Edson Barbosa, comes up against Al Iaquinta, who I consider, you know, quite a limited fighter, but that, you know, the way that Al Iaquinta's style matched up with Kevin Lee ended up with Al Iaquinta looking like the much better fighter in that match. But then once you got up to welterweight, it's just like 3 or 4 grindy wrestlers at the top, and then a couple of interesting strikers like Masvidal and Till and Wonderboy and Anthony Pettis. Jesus Christ. Yeah, welterweight's in a weird sort of place right now, which is maybe why Kevin Lee thinks that he can go up and blow the doors open there. Obviously no fights at welterweight in the UFC, but it still looks good for Rafael dos Anjos if he gets the win. Kevin Lee, very interesting character because he is so clearly amazingly talented. Really his problems have come more in conditioning than in ability. It's sort of like he's the grappling equivalent of that. Okay, you've hit me. You haven't knocked me out. What now, mate? You know, he has that. He gets on people's backs. He's incredible from there. Gets the body triangle and just chokes dudes out. And then if he doesn't get the choke, if they escape, or if he mounts them and they survive to the end of the round or whatever, like Tony Ferguson, Al Iaquinta escaped his back control, and then you really see him look deflated. And partly, you know, that'll be using up a ton of energy trying to finish from the position. You put a lot of pressure on yourself when you get that sort of position. You're like, well, I better finish, otherwise I've used all this energy to get this position. And and then I've got to fight him if he gets back up or gets out or the round ends. But the Ferguson fight, we forgave him the slowing down because firstly he had staff, like a whacking great staff saw on his chest, and the commission were like, yeah, no, don't see it, mate, probably a birthmark. Man, these MMA fighters get strange tattoos. But the Iaquinta fight, you really did see that sort of slowing down and getting a little bit deflated and discouraged. He's got this incredible reach. It's not going to be as incredible going up to welterweight, but it's still pretty incredible. 77-inch reach on, what is he, like 5'10", 5'11" frame. And he's, you can see him trying to use it. He wrote into the podcast back in the day, and we talked about it. I can't remember what episode that was, but it's a very interesting position to be in, where your strength is going forward and putting the opponent on the floor and just battering them. But, you want to use your reach too, because obviously the two things are at polar opposites. You're either on the end of your reach or you're crowding the opponent. So sometimes you'll see him in his fights where he'll be flicking out that jab and smacking the dude in the head from the other side of the ring almost. Like the Pereira fight is a hilarious body mismatch or reach mismatch. But even against like Iaquinta, when he was just flicking jabs out of his stance and not really committing too much, I thought he looked very good. And then he'll step in to land good blows. He steps on his jab a little bit much for what I would expect from someone trying to maintain range. And in that, he ends up giving up his reach. There was a few occasions against Pereira. There's a few occasions against a lot of the dudes he fights. But Tony Ferguson's a great example. You remember when Edson Barbosa, they both come in and Tony Ferguson hits him with that intercepting upward elbow, and that, I think that causes the cut that really like accelerates the fight. But Ferguson stepped in on him when he was jabbing and did exactly the same thing. To be able to step in close enough to elbow someone with an upward elbow in the face as they're jabbing means that they're giving up quite a lot of their range just by stepping deep and missing. I think, in an ideal world, if we were giving Kevin Lee like one striking style to make use of that reach, I'd have him do what Curtis Millender does, just constantly stepping on that lead knee so that the opponent doesn't feel comfortable lunging in, doesn't feel comfortable pressuring you, stepping, trying to time your steps in. So you just pump the right oblique kick into that front leg and then snap out the jab straight out of the stance, never having to step on it, just making that oblique kick itself controls the distance physically. There are guys who are good at controlling the distance by using their footwork and stuff, but that oblique kick can be used to just go, no, you stay there, and just keep poking them in the leg and standing them still. But, a lot of Lee's best takedowns come along the fence, but he shoots a mean takedown out in the open. He's had to a couple of times when he's been hurt. He took down Mustaev off a body kick. He took down Francisco Trinaldo after being, I think that was an uppercut to the solar plexus. That looked like it really hurt because he just folded down and then immediately grabbed the leg and chased it like a madman. He's had a couple where he's been hurt, but shows like good heart and just grinds through. But a lot of his best stuff has come along the fence. That get the double. Well, he's from Extreme Couture originally, I believe. It was he was one of Robert Follis's. He was one of Follis's students. And so you see a few of the things that are like Team Quest / Couture favourites. In this week's Filthy Casuals guide, I talked about, it's called a Filthy Casuals History of Smesh. We're doing a sub-series. And we're talking about like trapping hands on the ground. And Kevin Lee does some interesting stuff, like he kept gift wrapping Edson Barbosa, passing the hand behind the head. But he also, from half guard, will put his free knee on top of the opponent's wrist, slam it to the floor, and lands a couple of elbows or punches before trying to continue passing. And that's a Chael Sonnen favourite. You saw Matt Lindland do it all the time. I think I've seen Randy Couture do it a bit, but Randy Couture really liked to hold the half guard and try and hit from there. I think Chael did it to Anderson Silva. But yeah, that bounce into the fence and lift them from the hips out, that's a Randy Couture special. Very good at getting his arms locked around someone when they're on the fence, getting the arms locked for the double. Always tricky to do. As a guard passer, he's enormously entertaining. It's so fun. It's kind of bad watching Edson Barbosa get almost killed twice. He's got easily the most masochistic corner or delusional corner in the UFC. They're like, oh, just keep throwing kicks. Maybe you'll hit him. He did hit Lee with a wheel kick at one point, but then he took 2 more rounds damage and they didn't do anything about it. But in those two fights, you got 2 very different styles of top game. Habib's all about sitting him along the fence, scooping up the bottom leg, walking him around into smash pass positions and things, stepping over into mount. Whereas Kevin Lee's more traditional. And I say traditional, that's not like a bad thing. It's not like he's going backwards. But, I mean, how many people do you see using underpasses in MMA today? Like Hatsuhioki, and then no one else. And Kevin Lee will double underhook past people. Michael Chiesa was looking for triangles constantly from the bottom, and Kevin Lee just pressured in and underpassed him to the side and took his back. Very good at that traditional style of passing, the GSP flow chart, drive through to half guard, flatten the opponent out, pop your butt up and knee slide out, or pop your butt up and step over into mount. I mean, that's still, at the highest levels of grappling, the most effective form of passing. Gordon Ryan's entire DVD is like, and then ideally we want to get him into the flat half, because the flat half, you are basically fucked. But anyway, where this match becomes interesting is that Rafael dos Anjos is the best fighter in the world when he's going forward, and then really ineffective when he's not. His most recent losses have been when guys push forward, get him to the fence, and take him down. And that was Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman, so he fought two of the guys who are best at that. Really, he's at his best when he's pressure fighting people and cooking them and working them over with body shots and low kicks. And I always just think that he looks too small at welterweight. Even when they put him in against Robbie Lawler, I mean, Robbie Lawler's been up to middleweight, but he was never huge at welterweight. But when they put him in against Robbie Lawler, he looked tiny. And he won that one because Robbie Lawler struck with him and he looked really good. But I'm looking at this matchup going, how are you going to stay off the fence? Is that going to rely on Kevin Lee not pressuring you? And, as much as I've said, I would love to see Kevin Lee using his reach more. This is the sort of fight where he could just pressure forward, and that would probably be for the best for him. I mean, Rafael dos Anjos probably does have the most interesting clinch striking game in MMA right now, with the exception maybe of Leon Edwards. But, when you're smushed against the fence, you don't have that nice long clinch where you can make stuff happen and land short but impactful strikes like the knees and the elbows. Yeah, it's just so weird. I mean, especially thinking back to the Eddie Alvarez fight, because Eddie Alvarez is like the opposite of Rafael dos Anjos when he's dancing around and the opponent's following him, compared to when he's moving for the opponent and they're just standing in the center and waiting for him to come to them or whatever. He's night and day. When he's lunging to get to Conor McGregor, or he's lunging to get to, what's that guy, Nasty Yuken? I said it like Joe Rogan, I can't remember his name, but, when he's lunging in to get after guys. And, to an extent there, it's the same with Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier set up a really nice range, worked his jab well, and Eddie was having to, lunge for him. When you compare that to, when Michael Chandler or Justin Gaethje, or even Rafael dos Anjos are following him around the cage, he's beautifully gliding off in different directions. He's using his jab. They're walking onto it. He's darting out the side door. It's basically two sides of a coin. If you wanted to make a really good lightweight striker, I'd say try and mash Eddie Alvarez and Rafael dos Anjos' games together, but not the bad bits, only the good bits. Because that fight with Eddie Alvarez was so interesting, because Eddie Alvarez glided around the cage, changed direction beautifully, but even then, it was still like not a lucky punch, but like an unexpectedly effective connection that sort of spelled the end of it for dos Anjos. You could run that fight back, and maybe I could see him winning like 50% of engagement of fights between them if you ran like 100 fights. Anyway, but that's the fight this weekend. The fight really is, can Rafael dos Anjos stay off the fence? Can he do anything if he's put on the fence? Has he developed something new? Or is Kevin Lee as strong as those guys who are actual established welterweights who were just ragdolling dos Anjos? And how will that all play out, really? Anyway, let's do some questions and then we'll get out of here for this week. I only wanted to keep it short. Slack, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the reverse 1-2, or at least that's what I will call it. Instead of the jab and the cross, it's a cross with forward movement followed by a lunging jab, similar to Alexander Volkanovski's jab. Robbie Lawler throws it from southpaw, looking to hop outside the lead foot, left rear straight as both feet hop forwards, followed by a right lead jab. Very odd and aggressive, throws it a lot, especially in the second Rory fight. Is it something you've noticed in Robbie or other fighters? From Savage. I noticed Robbie doing a lot of straight hitting and bouncing in and out in that fight. It was probably the best fight for his karate boxing. But yeah, no, the 2-1 or the reverse 1-2 or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I've read old boxing books where they call the 1-2 is either a left straight, right straight, or a right straight, left straight. They consider both a 1-2. But the right straight into the left straight is a fantastic combination. Rose Namajunas, in her fight with second fight with Joanna, she does a lot of floating the right hand, so it almost comes in like palm facing. She's really showing the right hand, and then she'll shoot the left straight up the center afterwards. Sergey Kovalev stunned tons of guys with what, quote unquote, a jab, but he's moving his hips into it. He's leaping into a left straight, basically, and he hurts so many dudes with that. Rob Whittaker does it too. Did it to either, I think it was Uriah Hall. I think he did it to Brunson as well. And Jacare, actually. An interesting one is Petr Yan. If you watch him chase guys down, he'll do the left hook, right straight, left straight, or left hook, right straight jab. And what that effectively does is that he comes in from the outside with like a slappy left hook. The opponent puts their guard up expecting like swing, 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 swing. So he goes slap and then pop, pop up the middle with like a 1-2 basically, but with the other hand starting first. And then, of course, the left hand finishes so that you can just push them out onto the end of your reach again. So he comes in like slap, pop, pop, and that works really well. I love the right straight, left straight. And, of course, in point fighting styles, dudes love to lead with the right hand and come after it with a long left straight to catch people just as they're backing up on the end of their reach. But no, I'll have to go back and watch Robbie versus Rory again, if I can stomach it, and I'll have a look at that particular version you're talking about. Hey Jack, Patreon boy here. My question for you is about the push or bump. It doesn't seem to be used in boxing or kickboxing, but it does show up from time to time in MMA. Derek Lewis used a push to off-balance Alexander Volkov and score a KO. And Cejudo used pushes to off-balance TJ to set up his strikes. Are pushes and bumps an effective way to deal with faster fighters? If not, how do you recommend using them? Cheers from Brandon. P.S. A history episode on Raymond Deckers would be great. Old Deckers, legend. Pushing. I was talking about this in my pre-fight piece for this one event, because if you watch Giorgio Petrosian, he pushes people constantly, because that's the other side of recreating distance. The whole thing is like hit and then move out the side door and re-establish the distance so that they can't hit you back, or hit and move straight back and re-establish the distance so that they can't hit you back. But if you hit and then shove them, they're not going to be able to hit you well while stumbling backwards. And then when they're done, when they've caught their weight, they'll be out of range. So it works really well like that. Like if you watch him against Robin van Roosmalen, he's bullying Van Roosmalen. He'll hit him with like a stepping knee and then just shove him across the ring. Because Van Roosmalen obviously waits for things and then comes back with, hook, low kick. Or hook, uppercut, hook, low kick. If you want to watch him completely nullify that style of kickboxing, that Robin Van Roosmalen fight is the one to watch. But Muhammad Ali used to get really angry about the amount of pushing that George Foreman got away with. I don't think George Foreman would get away with that today. He pushed a lot of dudes around. And pulled them around by the head too. But Ali used to contend, and this is from The Fight. There's a section in Norman Mailer's The Fight where he's talking to the press, and he's insisting that George Foreman doesn't really knock people out; he pushes them over, which obviously is an exaggeration. But George Foreman did a lot of pushing. And people always ask me like, what part of sumo could be adopted into MMA? Obviously you can't grab the belt or the mawashi, but literally pushing people against the fence, just pushing is so useful. Stiff arming off the chest is so useful anyway. Like I always say, one of the nice ways to stop someone from clinching you is to aim for the body, throw straight punches to the body, and then they're not going to evaporate your bones. So if you've got the hand there, you're going for a straight punch, you can push off them. They're not going to be able to close on you as effectively as if you like hit them in the head, but it glances off the side of their skull, or it snaps their head back and then it's over their shoulder, and they've got room to duck in on you. If you're hitting someone in the chest, you've got the opportunity to push off them immediately afterwards. But another amazing use of push. I mean, Anderson Silva did a lot of pushing too, actually. If you watch those combinations against like Rich Franklin or whatever, Justin Gaethje does it too from the clinch. But one really nice one that Peter Ayats always used, and this is like half of Peter Ayats' KOs with the high kicks, that is, because he's got loads of them. But half of them were him pushing dudes straight backwards, just like a two-handed shove, and their hands automatically come down. Something about you, when you fall off balance, your hands drop, even if you're trying to keep them in your guard, and you go, uh-oh, and start bringing them up again, but then the shin bone just cracks through the top. Knocked out Andy Hug like that. Knocked out a load of dudes in the early K1s like that. The Andy Hug one's bad because you can hear it clack, and it sounds like a coconut being smashed with a hammer. It's really bad. But yes, pushing is probably the best defensive technique, in fact the best all-round technique, that no one really notices. Georgi Petrosian, if you put him in a pure boxing match, he wouldn't be half as effective because he does so much pushing. And dudes don't even notice. I mean, I called the article that I did on this, Georgi Petrosian and the answer to all strikes, because it really is. If you shove a dude, all his strikes are moving towards you. You know, you might get clipped with a punch around the side maybe, but everything is ruined by being shoved off balance backwards. Cheers, Brandon. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. Only just, a sort of informal one. Not really a lot of fighters that I keep my eye on and have great ideas about, to be honest. But some fun ones on there anyway with Aspen Ladd. Always want to see how she's going to do, because that division is pretty... Well, then there's that Vieira lass who beat Katzengarn. I mean, there's a couple in that division, even though that division is generally dire. Shoeface, obviously, always good to see him back. Davy Ramos. I mean, Davy Ramos and Shoeface are both fighting UFC debutants, and if they do win, that's an incredible way to get your career in the UFC kick-started. And then you've got the main event, which is obviously brilliant. This one event is just finishing up now. Well, I say finishing up, we're getting into the actual the fights that people care about that aren't Gary Tonnen, because he's still way down the undercard for some reason. But we're waiting on Sage to come on in a minute. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to be watching that for the rest of the day. Might write something about it afterwards. Might write something about the weekend afterwards. But if you want to get on the Patreon, I'm now making sure to put up something for the Patreon boys every week. Whether it's an article, maybe whether it's an extra episode. I don't know what it'll be, but so far we've done... I did something on Michael Page and AJ McKee last week. I did something on One this week. Probably end up doing something history next week because we're slowing down. Actually, no, next week I think we've got some fights, but we're heading into a little bit of a couple of week drought. So we'll do some history stuff soon. So if extra articles and shit sounds like your jam, head to the Patreon and sign up. And of course, it allows me to do 2 podcasts a week and maintain my lavish lifestyle, drinking stupid amounts of tea and then paying to have my teeth whitened. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonepodcast@gmail.com, and everything I write is on thefightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Gary Tonnen picking up a single leg and then reaping the knee into a heel hook. Bless.